Welcome to Money Talks. I'm Genevieve Westcott with what's up in agribusiness here at home and around the world. In this edition, John Key's government battles New Zealand's biggest peacetime crisis since the Great Depression of the 1930s. If you thought times were tough 80 years ago, listen up as we hear firsthand from one of the Prime Minister's loyal lieutenants, Agriculture Minister David Carter, about the devastation down south and how his government plans to recover, rebuild, and rise out of the rubble of Christchurch. Plus, the minister's inside oil on the state of our agriculture, the wool wars, the meat industry meltdown, and the ever higher global food, fuel, and fertilizer prices. Where are the bright spots for our agricultural exports in a clamoring world? Where are the pitfalls? And what advice does he have for you down on the farm? All this and much, much more coming up. Joining us now to talk ASB's latest rural economic report is ASB rural economist James Shortall. And let's start with the New Zealand dollar. It's lifted slightly over the past few days after falling 2 cents immediately after the quake, and insurance companies are the reason why, James.
Yeah, I mean, initially you'd think that the Kiwi dollar would fall rapidly, and it did. But since that time, of course, insurance companies around the world have got a pretty big exposure to us here in New Zealand, and it's big news around the world. So we have seen some buying, I think, from these insurance companies for the dollar, and that's going to be supportive in the short term. So we've ground up back over 75 cents.
Now, we know that the Fonterra payout forecast news last week, which was lost in the quake, of course, great news for the economy, worth something like $775 million or more. Dairy going to continue to be good into the long-term future?
Yeah, we're positive about the dairy industry. Especially over the next couple of years, we're seeing what we're around the world with the climatic conditions really having an impact, and I think that's going to be positive for all agricultural sectors, particularly dairy. We're seeing really strong demand out of these developing economies, and through till next year, we're going to see another strong payout. Thereafter, we should remain strong, but we're still going to see some volatility.
Yeah, and still questions about dairy's supply on the world stage. What are you picking?
Yeah, I think demand is growing stronger than supply at the moment, and the key reasons around that is, the feed input costs. A lot of big producing areas around the world, such as the US and such as the EU, then they do see, feed is really important to them. Grain prices, and because grain prices are so high at the moment, that's going to limit their ability to increase production. So it's good for us.
Let's talk about fuel prices, of course. We're so worried about what's happening here, but we got to remember there's more going on in MENA, Middle East, North Africa. Libya looks like it's poised to go into civil war at any moment. What did U.S. oil prices per barrel hit this week? Yeah,
well, towards the end of last week, we got up to close to $120 per barrel. We have come back a little bit, and at the moment we're sort of tracking at around $114. So depending on what the outcome is, and through the Middle East, then this could have a really big impact on oil prices, and through I wouldn't rule out a plus over $150 per barrel, which is an all-time high, well over the levels we saw in 2008, and we all know some of the impacts that that sort of commodity boom around that time had.
Okay, on a better note, lamb prices still looking good, and you're picking they're going to stay that way for quite a while.
Yeah, I mean, the lamb industry is going through a funny phase at the moment. The UK consumption is down. Retail prices have lifted. So I think consumers are a bit cautious about, the types of meat that they're selecting. They're probably looking at other types of meat, but, it all comes back down to supply. And of course, here in New Zealand, a lot of farmers have lost a lot of lambs this year. And the Australian production is well back. European production is well back, so that's really supporting the market at the moment. So it's really supply is much smaller than the decreases we're seeing in demand.
And the American farmers, of course, are still turning their corn into ethanol. What's the long-term implications here at home?
Well, I think government policy, particularly out of the US and out of the EU, does mean that we're going to see plenty of corn going into ethanol production. Right now it's around 40% of their corn production goes into ethanol. It's going to be interesting to see some of the dynamics as to other governments. I mean, of course, high food prices, where that may have some impacts on some of those policies. But if that continues, and it looks like it will, then that's going to underpin prices.
Let's go back to the U.S. and beef prices. We know that their supply of beef is down. How bad is it?
Well, I think I think there's sort of some medium-term implications there for supply because we're seeing quite a small calf crop coming through, and the beef herd has been reducing also. So that really limits the amount of production and amount of cattle that can come through the market, probably over the next 2 to 3 years, realistically. So I think that's some key fundamentals. Of course, also with the US dollar where it is, then it means that US exporters, like to export their product. They're able to get good prices, while importers are going to pay more for their product from New Zealand or Australia. So the market is very tight, the supplies are down, and with where the dollar's going to go over the next 12 months, then I think those fundamentals are going to be maintained, and it should be good news for the farmers here in New Zealand.
Thanks, James. Coming up after the break, the government will have to make some tough decisions in the next 6 weeks, and taxpayers can expect to dig deep into their pockets to fund the $20 billion cleanup. The agriculture minister, whose own farm lay close to the epicenter of the quake, talks frankly about strategy and salvation. But first, answer this in our Farmers' Facts and Figures quiz. The New Zealand government's already borrowed $13.5 billion offshore. How much is that costing us every week? The answer when we come back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Money Talks. Just before the break, we asked you, the New Zealand government's already borrowed $13.5 billion offshore. How much is that costing us every week? The answer, $300 million a week. That's a whole lot of interest. And that means two choices for the government, increasing its debt or increasing our taxes. Joining us now is Agriculture Minister David Carter, and newly appointed as Acting Minister for Economic Development, so Jerry Brownlee can focus on the quake recovery. Thanks for joining us, Mr.
Pleasure.
Carter. Let me begin by asking, where were you when the quake struck?
I was in Wellington in the Beehive. Some of the office staff felt the shake. I didn't feel it. I told them to toughen up. That's nothing like we'd be having in Christchurch. And then we quickly realised that it was Christchurch based. So it was a nervous time as we tracked my own wife, family, and to make sure everybody was okay. And later on that afternoon, I came down with the Prime Minister on an Air Force flight and saw for myself the devastation.
And what were your first thoughts when you walked through those streets and saw what had happened?
Oh, unbelievable. We'd seen images. I was amazed how quickly technology kicked in. People were texting pictures, etc. So you just had to watch the TV to see the devastation. But it was quite incredible to see it firsthand. I was born and bred in Christchurch. I've lived all my life close to Christchurch, and it's pretty hard to take, but we've all got to just get on with it now, and that's the challenge for not only government, but Cantabrians, and frankly for all of New Zealanders.
Your own farm, of course, Teddington, lies not too far from the epicentre over Littleton Way. What kind of damage did you take?
Well, our house was without power, as many were. It took about 3 or 4 days to get power back on. We'd built a house that's made out of a local stone, so quite a lot of that structure is damaged. It's quite livable. So compared with other people in parts of Christchurch, we got off lightly. It's going to take us some time to restore the house, but that's not a high priority just at the moment.
What have you done with your family at the moment? Are they still on the farm?
No, we've actually separated the family a bit. The older two girls are living with friends, one in Rakaya, one in Blenheim, and the two younger ones, we took them up to Wellington over the last weekend and enrolled them in a local school. I was one that, having watched the shakes of September 4, one of the things that I think we perhaps got a little wrong was leaving the schools closed for too long and the kids not having a chance to get back to normality. So I was pretty keen to get my younger two, one's 6, one's 10, back into school and let them realise life still goes on.
You know, this is going to take years and years to recover and rebuild. Can it be done?
Oh, yeah, it can be done, and there's an absolute determination from Christchurch people to make sure it happens. You've got the Prime Minister himself, another born and bred Christchurch person saying, we are going to do it. Frankly, as I've travelled around New Zealand, the thing that's been great to see was the outpouring of support from all New Zealanders. So it's a job that we will do. We won't do it without all New Zealanders supporting us. But the city can actually be rebuilt and be a better city than it was.
I think the big fear is, are we going to have enough people, enough skilled tradespeople to help in the restructuring of the city? We know that a lot of them have gone over now for the Queensland floods. How big a problem is that going to be for the government?
Well, I think it's going to be a challenge, amongst other challenges. We've got to realise that we're just a week or so after the event. The first thing we've been concentrating on was trying to save as many people that were trapped in buildings. The next stage is going to be about the recovery of those that have perished in the disaster. Then we need to be starting to plan the city to start the rebuilding process and then make sure we've got the labour. So I think we can't expect all these problems to be solved on day one, and nobody does. We've now just got to methodically work through the issues. But people will come back to Christchurch, I'm sure, to help with this rebuilding process.
James, I think one of the big concerns, of course, is that Christchurch is at the rural service heart of the country, if you like, certainly of the South Island. I see that Skellerup overnight has said that they're okay, they're back open for business, but it's got to be a big worry for farmers about what happens to the rest of the infrastructure. What are you hearing?
Yeah, well, I mean, from what I've heard, you know, the rural community has got through this, and probably the destruction has been less severe than perhaps it was in September, which is great news on the farm. I guess the processing and the infrastructure is a key concern, but you know, it seems like most of those are up and running, and you know, are going to continue. And you know, I think as a lot of people have pointed out, then really determination to get on with it, and all the companies are running behind to make sure that you know, the jobs are getting done.
Where is the money going to come from, Minister, realistically? I mean, we're already in an economic soft spot, if you like. It's tough times out there. Where are you going to be taking the money from to give to?
Well, the first money comes out of the EQC, Earthquake Commission. New Zealand has the best established disaster fund of its type in the world. We shouldn't underestimate the success of EQC at a time like this. The next tranche of money will clearly come from overseas insurance companies, the reinsurers, the likes of Lloyd's, as they assist the insurance companies meet their costs. There's still going to be a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built, and that's going to be a partnership, frankly, between Christchurch City Council and government. We concentrated initially on getting a support package out there at Cabinet this last week, making sure that people knew that there was money in their pockets at the end of this week. The next thing we've got to do is start looking at a budget, and it's going to be about reprioritising to make sure that the money is available for Canterbury. It may mean some of the other ideas that we had are put on hold.
Such as?
Well, some of the roading infrastructure in Auckland, for example, needs to be reconsidered. We haven't made those decisions, but we now need to realise that, in my opinion, the biggest opportunity for economic development in New Zealand is to actually rebuild our second largest city, which of course is Christchurch.
We already have an enormous amount of foreign debt. How much money are we going to have to borrow offshore for this project to get Christchurch back up off its knees?
I don't know that figure yet. We were very keen as a government to move back out of deficits, get our budget back into surplus as quickly as possible. When we took over as government 2 years ago, the previous Minister of Finance, Mr Cullen, had been quite gloating about the fact that he had handed New Zealand 10 years of deficit. We were keen to get that back to 5 or 6 years of deficit and then back into surplus. We may have to reconsider that, and that's the sort of discussion we're starting to have with Minister Bill English over the next week or so.
James, it's really changed what I think most ordinary New Zealanders are now expecting their lives to look like for the next even 10 years out. Overall, where is the money going to come from realistically? And how are we, the ordinary Kiwis, going to feel the pinch in our own lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be quite a rebalancing here. I mean, not only just through what we're seeing through donations. We've seen, you know, I work for ASB, of course. There's been a big donation of $1 million, and you know, the other industry participants have been involved in donations also. Everyone's been donating, so that money comes out of profits, and you know, personal people have been donating. So that all is all going to go to Christchurch. There's been a massive you know, response from New Zealanders, but of course that does mean that they can't spend that money on other things. So there is a bit of a rebalancing in a lot of ways. It's going to have some effects on the economy, and of course you've got to cut in some areas and to spend in others. And all New Zealanders have got to be prepared that you know, they may see some changes in their lifestyle and changes in their and the funding that they receive in order to benefit Christchurch and the people that have been most affected. Yeah,
our lives have changed forever, all of us, for quite a long time, I suspect.
Yeah, well, I think we're dealing with a disaster of the magnitude that the world hasn't seen very often, and for it to be here in little old New Zealand, down the bottom end of the world, to be our second largest city, Christchurch. It's going to be a challenge. We're all accepting that. We've just got to get on with it.
And I think the challenge too is to persuade people to go back, those who have left. Is that going to be difficult?
Well, that's certainly something that worries me. I was at the airport as I came out with my two younger kids on Sunday, and Air New Zealand was telling me they're flying 10,000 people a day out of Christchurch. A lot of that will be temporary. I certainly hope most of it is temporary. But if we show that we're prepared to get government support there, government determination to do our part to rebuild that city, people who have lived there all their lives, I don't see them leaving. We've just got to give them a reason to believe in their city again. Cantabrians are pretty proud people. We've got the Crusaders there helping us all the way. No, we'll be back. We'll make that city a great city again.
Okay, let's move on, gentlemen, to some of the agricultural matters at hand, and let's talk about the struggling wool industry. James, where is it at today?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I was quite surprised. We saw the Wool Partners Cooperative. That didn't go through. I've seen a big increase in wool prices, so it's likely that does have some influence on that partnership and that co-op going through. But I thought, I did think that it was an ideal opportunity for farmers to consolidate and to get an industry together and have some power in the international market.
And yet nothing happened. So, Minister, I ask you, what happens next? Does the government need to get involved to bang some heads together to say move forward?
I've been banging some heads together for a while, actually. I'm a person that's farmed myself for 30 years as a sheep farmer. It's a wonderful product. I think farmers lost confidence in their own product. I think you can understand why the prices we're receiving in many cases got as low that we weren't even covering the cost of shearing. We've seen a remarkable increase in the price of strong wool over the last 12 months, up about 40%. Farmers now are quite delighted to go and spend a day in the wool shed, whereas they certainly weren't a couple of years ago. It is about getting unity back into the wool industry. I personally subscribed immediately to Wool Partners Co-op. I thought I wanted to be involved further in value adding to my wool product. I'm disappointed it didn't make the grade, but I think the fact that there was a pledge of $30 million from farmers is a fair indication there is a will from many farmers to do something. We now need the dust to settle on the failure of WPC to meet its targets and see what arises out of that. Of course, everything's been a bit knocked around now with the earthquake, with other people having things on their mind, but we'll see something come out of the attempt of WPC to raise that money.
Okay, let's talk also about the meat industry, another one that's on its knees, and there seems to be no progress whatsoever. Are you prepared to step into that at some point?
I personally believe we're seeing a repositioning of the price of food internationally.
Absolutely, yes.
Which is of great benefit to all New Zealand food producers. So the sheep industry has some challenges. Its biggest challenge is it's got overcapacity in the processing facilities. We built that processing capability many years ago for 70 million ewes, and we now have just over 30 million ewes. That rationalisation will occur and will occur over time. It would be better if it was a coordinated rationalisation, but attempts to get some of the co-ops to talk together have been difficult to date.
Absolutely. Again, are you prepared to step in at some point?
Well, at the end of the day, these are privately owned companies. They're owned by the farmers themselves. They must take the initiative. But I've spent a lot of time talking to the companies. The strategy that's being developed by now and taken around the country, I think is a genuine attempt to engage farmers, and farmers who are prepared to be engaged have actually found that process quite worthwhile. So that's coming to fruition. I personally think you will see some developments around rationalisation of benefit to the meat industry.
Of course, another thorny issue here in New Zealand, the question of water. James, how critical is this moving forward on the global market?
Well, I think there's two issues: the availability of it to increase New Zealand's economic capacity, I guess, particularly in dairying and some of the Canterbury region. There's massive water resources there, and that's really affecting. We talk about food. That's something that we have, and a lot of countries don't have. So it's about the availability of it, and then it's also about the quality of it and what that's going to do to the environment and the more intensive farming. So there's two aspects there, and they're both going to be very important to our branding in the market and also our ability to expand.
And I think, too, with something like the quake having hit us now, is agriculture going to, in a way, be pushed to the back of people's minds?
Well,
we got a lot of other things to worry about.
In my opinion, not at all. Quite the opposite.
Tell me why.
What runs the Canterbury economy, what is absolutely fundamental to the city of Christchurch, is the prosperity of our rural areas. And I agree with James. This country is absolutely blessed with water. In Canterbury, we waste 96% of it by letting it go out to sea. So I've been spending more time on water than any other issue in my portfolio. And as Ag Minister, I'm determined to do something that delivers sustainability around water to Canterbury and to other parts of New Zealand, because with the issue of climate change, it is even more critical that we harness this competitive advantage of New Zealand of water.
Looking around the world, where are the real bright spots for New Zealand farmers? Give us some good news.
Oh, well, China's just self-evident. It's now very rapidly become our second largest trading partner, a country of 1.4 billion people, people who are becoming increasingly wealthy very rapidly. And when you've been an Asian and a poor Asian, as you become wealthy, you westernise, you change your diets. All of that augurs very well for New Zealand. And China, and there's India, and there's the rest of Southeast Asia. The wonderful opportunities for New Zealand food producers, provided we realise what the world wants. And what the world wants from New Zealand is for us not to compete on price, because we won't win that battle. What we must compete on is absolute top quality and integrity around our food products. And then the outlook for New Zealand farmers is just absolutely great.
James, of course, foreign ownership, very quickly to wrap up, that's always a thorny issue here. All very well to sell to China, but they're coming in here and wanting to buy up things like PGG Wrightson, increasing their stake there. You're talking about intellectual property that could very well go offshore. That's a danger, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the people that, the areas that have come out of the global financial crisis with cash are the ones that can buy the companies right now, and it's definitely the Asian areas, and that is a risk to us and our economy. I think longer term as to whether we're able to hold on to some of those assets or not.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Stay with us. Coming up after the break, future proof. What our experts will be keeping track of over the next 7 days. Buckle up for the ride. It could be bumpy. But first, a question for you in our Farmers Facts and Figures quiz. How many aftershocks have rocked Christchurch since the September earthquake? The answer when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Money Talks. Just before the break, we asked you, how many aftershocks have rocked Christchurch since the last September earthquake? The answer, 4,000 and counting have been felt across the region, and they're not over yet. And now it's time for Future Proof. What's coming up that our experts will be watching? James, how about you?
Well, I think next week's going to be interesting with the Reserve Bank announcement on the official cash rate. We're actually picking a drop in the official cash rate, and the market's sort of starting to pick that there could be a softening in that rate. So the benefit for farmers is going to be some lower interest rates in the short term. It's just over the past 24 hours in some of the banks, and ASB has dropped their home loan rate. So that's sort of an indication of the change in the market and the outlook of what impact the earthquakes had, and also a weak New Zealand economy at the moment.
Minister, is that going to be a good move by the Reserve Bank if that's the way they go?
Well, it's the independence of the Reserve Bank Act means the Governor of the Reserve Bank should decide, but it seems to me, listening to the Economist, that there is a good reason now to consider a downgrade. We've previously been gritting our teeth thinking at some stage later this year interest rates may well have started to rise. The economy certainly has suffered with the earthquake, there is no doubt about that. We were looking to have quite good growth figures towards the end of this year. We're now going to go back to a very low economy base.
What are you picking? What are you picking? James, what are you hearing?
Well, I think it's going to be in the low, sort of under 1% potentially. We probably we're going to go have some negative quarters in the short term, and the pickup is going to be later on this year, probably from the Rugby World Cup and the reconstruction. But as we know, then the reconstruction can take a lot longer than 6 or 12 months. So with the effects of this one, it could be much longer. And
for ordinary Kiwis, people like us, they're paying more at the grocery store for their food. Fuel prices as well. I hear that even you're moaning about it. What are you paying now to fill up, James?
Yeah, well, if fuel prices are going up, it's hurting the pocket. It's hurting the pocket.
Yeah, it's what, $2.08, something like that? That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but go back to really what we are talking about here. This is an agricultural economy. We're seeing world food prices rise. Ultimately, that's got to be good for this country. Now, we've got a few issues to get through, I accept that. But the outlook generally for the future of this economy is pretty good. And New Zealanders need to realise that.
What's it like sitting around the cabinet table? When
Well,
something like this happens, what's it really like? What do you say to each other?
Last week's Cabinet was very much focused on what is the immediate 1, 2, 3 week response. Next week when we meet, we'll be starting to look at longer term action and this issue of reprioritising, making sure we then present a budget that recognises the challenges that New Zealand as a whole faces, but particularly recognising the challenges and the opportunities that we have to rebuild Christchurch to make it a better city.
And on top of all that, it's election year.
That's right.
Who would have picked it?
Well, it's sort of the life of a politician is 3 yearly job interviews. We were getting ready for that, but certainly we're going to still carry on governing without that being the primary focus, frankly, because at this stage what New Zealanders want is a government and politicians that are focused on the immediate challenges of facing the challenge of the earthquake.
Coming up in the next 7 days, what are you going to be keeping a close eye on?
Well, I've just picked up, as you mentioned right at the start of the program, a new portfolio area, economic development. So it's important that I now grasp that challenge and do as good a job as possible with that. I owe that to John Key. He's given me that role. So I need to have a look and get to understand that portfolio better. I need to consider whether some of the programs, some of the initiatives that are underway are the best use of taxpayers' money at this stage, or whether some of that focus shouldn't really be shifted again towards what I see as a great opportunity for economic development, the rebuild of Christchurch.
The rebuild of Christchurch. And your top tip to farmers who are listening tonight, what do you say to them?
Have confidence in our industry. I think it's really poised for a wonderful period of time, and I don't mean just a short term, I mean over the next decade at least. What they need to do as farmers is concentrate on quality. We must realise where we sit in the world. We have positioned ourselves extremely well. If you take lamb, for example, when I started farming, it was a relatively low sought after commodity. It is now an item that is likely to be the most expensive priced item on any menu, San Francisco, Sydney or Christchurch. What we need to do is accept that we've repositioned a product like that as a top quality product, believe in it, and continue to strive to sell the best to the world, to the people who can afford to buy our product.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. Thanks to my guests, ASB Rural Economist James Shortall and Agriculture Minister David Carter. We love to hear your feedback, so drop me a line on the website. And for those who say it can't be done, the resurrection of the Christchurch ruins, I've got one word for you: Kobe. The Japanese city suffered massive destruction in 1995 when a 20-second earthquake demolished the city, killing more than 5,000 people, injuring 400,000 more. But 12 years later, Kobe was reborn as a thriving community. This is a before and after picture you have to see to believe. And belief is what we now need more than ever. Keep the faith. See you next time.